They thought she would always stay, no matter how cold they became. But the day the strong woman quietly closed the door forever, they finally understood the value of the love they had destroyed. There's a dangerous illusion people fall into when someone loves them deeply. They begin to believe that love is permanent, automatic, guaranteed. And maybe you've seen this before. A woman gives her heart with patience. She forgives things she should not forgive. She checks on people who never check on her. She carries emotional weight no one even notices. She stays loyal while others become careless with her presence. At first, everyone praises her kindness, but slowly, strangely, that same kindness becomes invisible. Because human beings often do not notice the warmth of the sun until winter arrives, and the tragedy is this. The strong woman rarely leaves during the first betrayal. She rarely leaves during the second disappointment. No, she stays. She hopes, she explains, she waits, she gives chance after chance while silently bleeding inside. But there comes a moment, a terrifyingly quiet moment, when something inside her changes forever. No screaming, no revenge, no dramatic ending, just silence. And that silence becomes the loudest goodbye people have ever heard. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul, because when she finally walks away, people are no longer fighting her absence. They are forced to face themselves." Tonight, we are going to explore the painful psychology behind why people take genuine love for granted, why strong women leave quietly, and why the door they close almost never opens again. And by the end of this story, you may realize someone's silence was never weakness. It was the final chapter. Part 1. The dangerous habit of always being there. There is something heartbreaking about a woman who keeps showing up for people who barely notice her sacrifices anymore. Not because she is weak, but because she believes love means endurance. She believes if she stays patient long enough, people will eventually understand her heart. And for a while, she convinces herself that they will. So she becomes emotionally available at all hours. She forgives disrespect disguised as bad moods. She accepts half-hearted apologies. She keeps conversations alive when others stop trying. She carries relationships on her back while pretending she isn't exhausted. And this is where the tragedy begins. Because the more consistent she becomes, the less valuable her presence appears. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, the human tendency to normalize what is constantly available. In simple words, people stop appreciating what they think they can never lose. A text message once cherished becomes expected. Her emotional support becomes assumed, her loyalty becomes background noise, and eventually, people stop seeing her as a human being with emotional limits. They start seeing her as emotional infrastructure, like air, like gravity, like something that will simply always exist. Nietzsche once wrote, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." But invisible ties are also the easiest to neglect. Because when someone never abandons you, you stop fearing abandonment. And many strong women suffer in silence because they mistake emotional tolerance for emotional maturity. They think surviving pain is proof of love. But survival is not the same thing as peace. A woman can smile beside you while emotionally disappearing inch by inch. That is the terrifying part. The ending rarely begins with anger. It begins with emotional exhaustion, with the quiet realization that her love is being consumed but never protected. And one day, after carrying everyone else emotionally for too long, something inside her asks a dangerous question. What happens if I stop? That question changes everything. Part 2. The silent moment. She stops explaining herself. At first, she tries to communicate. That's what people never understand. Strong women do not leave suddenly. They speak. They warn, they cry in private while still trying to fix everything in public. She tells people when something hurts her. She explains why certain words cut deeply. She asks for honesty, for effort, for emotional reciprocity, not perfection, just sincerity. But over time, something devastating begins to happen. Her pain gets minimized. She hears phrases like, "You're overthinking," "You're too sensitive," "You always make things emotional." And slowly, she learns a painful lesson. Some people only love the version of her that requires nothing. So she begins shrinking herself emotionally to keep the peace. She stops bringing up what bothers her, stops asking difficult questions, stops expecting deeper conversations. And from the outside, it looks like things are getting better. The arguments become fewer, the tension becomes quieter, the emotional reactions disappear. But what people mistake for peace is often emotional surrender. This is the moment many relationships secretly die, because silence is not always calmness. Sometimes silence is grief. Carl Jung believed that what remains unspoken does not disappear. It transforms. And in relationships, unspoken pain transforms into emotional detachment. A strong woman can sit beside someone she once loved deeply and internally begin preparing her exit months before she physically leaves. That's why her final goodbye often shocks people, because they mistake her silence for acceptance. But internally, she has already mourned the relationship while still inside it. That is why when she finally leaves, she looks calm. The crying already happened alone. The sleepless nights already happened quietly. The emotional war already exhausted her spirit long before anyone noticed. And here is the cruel irony. The moment she stops fighting for the relationship is usually the exact moment the other person finally realizes they are losing her, because humans often ignore consistent love until they feel its withdrawal, like oxygen disappearing from a room. Suddenly her silence feels cold. Her absence feels terrifying. Her energy no longer reaches toward them, and panic begins. Messages become longer. Attention suddenly increases. Promises appear. Effort returns too late. But there is something people fail to understand about emotionally exhausted women. When a strong woman is truly done, she does not leave loudly. She leaves internally first. And once her soul disconnects, her body eventually follows. No manipulation can revive a heart that suffered too long in silence. That is why her final goodbye feels so permanent. Because emotionally, she already buried the relationship long ago. Part 3. Why people only realize her value after she's gone. The strange thing about human nature is this: presence hides value. When someone is constantly there, comforting, listening, forgiving, understanding, the mind slowly stops registering their importance, not because their love lacks value, but because familiarity blinds people to miracles happening every day. And this is exactly why her absence becomes so haunting. Because once the strong woman leaves, reality becomes louder than memory. Suddenly no one checks in the same way she did. No one notices the emotional details she noticed. No one offers warmth without conditions. No one remembers the little things. The emotional labor she carried silently becomes visible only after it disappears. It's similar to walking into a house during winter after the heat stops working. You never notice the warmth while it existed, but the cold becomes unbearable once it's gone. And this is where regret begins to grow. Not dramatic regret, not movie scene regret. Real regret is quieter than that. It appears at night, in silence. During moments when life becomes emotionally heavy and the person who once made everything lighter is no longer there. People begin replaying memories differently. The conversations they ignored suddenly matter. Her patience suddenly looks rare. Her loyalty suddenly feels impossible to replace. And the most painful realization arrives slowly. She loved me in ways I did not deserve. That realization can destroy a person internally because there is a unique pain attached to losing someone who genuinely cared for you while you were too distracted, immature, wounded, or selfish to appreciate them properly. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." And many people understand her value only in reverse, only after the door closes, only after the silence settles, only after another relationship fails to reach the emotional depth she once gave naturally. But here is the truth many people struggle to accept. You cannot heal loneliness by replacing people. Some souls are irreplaceable because of how deeply they loved. And when someone loses a strong woman, they are not simply losing companionship. They are losing emotional safety, loyalty, understanding, presence, grace. Things modern relationships desperately lack. This is why her absence lingers for years, not because she was perfect, but because she was real, and real love leaves fingerprints on the soul, especially when it disappears forever. That is why people often return long after she is gone, not because they suddenly changed overnight, but because pain finally taught them what love could not. And unfortunately, wisdom arrives too late for many people, because the strongest women eventually learn something powerful. Love should not require self-destruction. Part 4. The final door she closes forever. There comes a moment in every strong woman's life when exhaustion becomes clarity, not bitterness, clarity. And that clarity changes everything. Because after giving too much for too long, she finally sees the truth she spent years avoiding. Love cannot survive where respect is absent. No amount of patience can heal people committed to carelessness. No amount of loyalty can save relationships built on emotional imbalance. And no amount of self-sacrifice can force someone to value what they never feared losing. So something inside her awakens, quietly, almost invisibly. She stops chasing closure from people incapable of accountability, stops explaining her worth to emotionally unavailable hearts, stops begging for the bare minimum while calling it love, and for the first time in a long time, she chooses herself. This is not revenge. That is what people misunderstand. A healed woman does not leave to punish others. She leaves to protect what remains of her soul. Lao Tzu once wrote, "Care about what other people think, and you will always be their prisoner." And many strong women spend years imprisoned by emotional attachment, hoping love will eventually transform neglect into devotion. But eventually they realize something freeing. The door they are closing is not just a relationship. It is a cycle of over-giving, over-explaining, over-forgiving, over-abandoning themselves to keep others comfortable. And once she breaks that cycle, she becomes almost impossible to manipulate again. That is why people are shocked by her final form. Because the woman who once tolerated emotional crumbs suddenly becomes unreachable. Not cold, just awake. She no longer confuses inconsistency with passion, no longer romanticizes suffering, no longer stays where peace disappears. And strangely, this is often the moment people begin respecting her. When access is gone, when her energy is no longer available on demand, when her silence becomes permanent, when they realize the version of her they miss no longer exists, because pain transformed her, not into someone cruel, into someone conscious. And perhaps the saddest truth of all is this: many people meet a strong woman twice in life. Once when she is full of unconditional love, and again after the world taught her boundaries. But the second version rarely opens the same door twice. So if someone in your life loves you deeply, appreciate them while their heart is still open. Because one day, the silence you ignore today may become the silence you carry for the rest of your life. And if you are the strong woman in this story, understand this: walking away from what destroys your peace is not weakness. It is self-respect, finally becoming louder than attachment. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a human being can do is close the door softly and never return. Some people only understand love after loss introduces them to emptiness. So tonight, ask yourself honestly, who in your life has been loving you quietly while you've been too distracted to notice? And if this story felt personal, maybe it's because a part of you already knows. Not every goodbye comes with shouting. Some arrive wrapped in silence and last forever. If this video spoke to something deep inside you, subscribe for more cinematic journeys into human psychology, love, attachment, and emotional transformation. Because sometimes, the lessons that change our lives the most arrive after the door has already closed.